is Nurul Izzati Asyikin with Zulkifly. I am from the Department of Psychology, from my IIM. So I appreciate everyone for for spending your time to learn about psychology this morning. So today, I would like to share on somehow, a little bit of what we discussed in the introduction to psychology. So this is basically what I want to aim. So what we can aim today. So first, we want to know what psychology is. So we are going to look at the definition with S of psychology. And then we are going to look at what are the approaches to psychology in the sense that we are going to look at multiple approaches that represent intellectual backdrop of psychology in the sense that what are factors that can help us to understand the topics discussed in psychology. So what are the topics covered in psychology is what we are going to do next. And lastly, what are the branches in psychology and how does it differ from other field? So these are the four main overview, but the most that we are going to talk today is number 3. But now let's move on to the first part. What is psychology? But before I'm going to explain to you the definition of psychology, may I know what do you understand about psychology? So when you hear the word psychology, what comes to your mind? Can anyone share with me?
I think we can write on the chat box.
Yeah.
We everyone is automatically muted.
All right.
Yeah.
So hopefully you can write your opinion on the chat box. And then let's compare what do you understand with the definition of psychology. So these are basically definitions of psychology. If we take from the translation of the Greek language, basically, psychology comes from two words, psyche and logos, in which the literal meaning is the study of the soul. However, this definition can somehow be known also as the study of the mind of behavior. But if we only take this definition, the study of the mind and behavior, the history can be traced back, even before century, during the Greek civilization. But the current one, the consensus that we are using is the scientific study of human behavior and mental processes. And how does it differ from the two? So basically, if we were to differentiate the current, the terminology that we usually use to define psychology is with the word scientific there. So that's what differentiate the psychology, the current field of psychology with what it was before. Because the scientific aspect. So these are the approach, it resembles the approach, the current approach that the field of psychology is embracing as compared to before. So later, however, we have to bear in mind that somehow different scholars have their own interpretation of psychology and this somehow very much related to their approach. For example, James W. Carlyle take psychology is the scientific study of people experiences because to him, human behavior and mental processes is basically explain what we experience every day. Some other scholars, let's say for example, Walter Pillsbury and John B. Watson. So John B. Watson is the behaviorist and he defined psychology as the science of behavior. And this is also somehow explain his stand on psychology in the sense that, let's for example, take John B. Watson. He only consider behavior as a part of understanding human nature, and he eliminated and somehow does not want to acknowledge the role of cognition to understand psychology. So basically, his approach to psychology is he look at the behavioral aspect only. And then the mind. So So the definition of the mind somehow given by what we call that William Wundt. So some also look at on the science of the mind. So this somehow reflects again their approaches. So the subject that they study focuses much on the mind aspect as compared to behavior and other aspect. So these are the definition of psychology. But the one that we take is here, the consensus, the scientific study of human behavior and mental processes. So hopefully things are clear up to this point. So when it comes to approaches to psychology, so how can we understand people's mind and behavior? We have quite a number of approaches. So we look at multiple approaches that represent intellectual backdrop of psychological science. So these we have 7 approaches to studying psychology provide different views of behavior, and therefore each may contribute to uniquely valuable insight. So what are those 7 approaches? We have biological approaches, and this is quite important because we are going to focus on the body, particularly brain and nervous system, to understand, how does this can cause a person's behavior or a person to behave in certain way. We also look at the behavioral aspect. This is basically just like John B. Watson. We look at the observable behavioral responses and environmental determinants. We look at people's behavior. Their responses towards their responses from the environment. So we also have psychodynamic. So psychodynamic is very much related to Sigmund Freud. If you ever heard about Sigmund Freud, he is one of the forerunner of psychodynamic. It used to be called as psychoanalysis. So psychodynamic, we tap on the unconscious thought, the biological and societal demands, conflicts within ourselves, as well as childhood experiences that can somehow explain this behavior. We also have humanistic approach, and this is the one that is offer the positive qualities as well as positive capacity for growth and free will. These are the aspects that they look in order to explain a person's mental processes as well as behavior. We also have cognitive approaches. So in the sense that cognitive approach, we look at mental processes that involve on, our attention, our perception, remembering, memory, thinking, as well as problem solving. We also have evolutionary approach. We look at the ideas of adaptation, reproduction, as well as natural selection, and last but not least is social cultural. So social cultural, basically we look at the aspects of society in the sense of family, how the social is somehow related also to socio-economic factors. So from these approaches, we can understand, it can help us to understand topic discussed in psychology. So what are the topics that we discuss in psychology basically? So if for those who are somehow majoring in psychology, introduction to psychology is basically one of the quite the toughest subject because of how wide it covers and how depth it covers. So this time around, we are going to cover, what are the topics discussed in psychology. So these are basically the topics. So imagine, and this is not all. Sometimes we cover more. So first and foremost, we cover research methods because remember the definitions that we adopt to the scientific studies of mental behavior and the scientific studies of mental processes as well as human behavior. So the scientific part somehow makes us have to embrace research methods. So students are usually exposed with research methods, and then these are going for biological perspective. They need to understand the brain and how is it related to behavior. We also discuss about sensation and perception as well as consciousness. We also discuss about memory, learning, motivation and emotion, human development, personality, social psychology, and last but not least is psychological disorder. I believe that many of us, when we discuss about psychology, this comes to our mind, psychological disorder. So we talk about, major depressive disorder, anxiety disorder, schizophrenia. So especially post COVID-19, and the current war that happens, in our world. So people can somehow discuss about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. But in psychology, we start with, not understanding the psychological disorder, but most of the time we discuss about, the normal healthy people, how our daily life, our experiences. So these are the topics. So first and foremost, let's go to research methods. So here, when it comes to research methods, usually we look at, we have to understand why research methods is here. Again, I would like to reiterate, because the definition of psychology is a scientific study, research methods is very important, because that makes us, stand as science. So psychologists use scientific methods to address research questions. And this somehow involve, we can start with having a theory, and or making observation, and then we formulate hypothesis and we test the hypothesis. After testing the hypothesis, we draw conclusions and evaluate the conclusions. So we are going to also expose the types of research methods. So we have descriptive research methods, correlational research method, experiments research methods, but not limited to, because sometimes in psychology, so if people embarking in, postgraduate study, they have psychometric research methods and so on. So another parts of research that is important is sample, or other participants are basically. So the sample must be representative of the population. Let's say, for example, if we want to, study among the B40 community. So the sample must be representative of B40. Means the income should be, the family income should fall into B40. So we cannot take random people with whatever income to and then make conclusion about about that particular group. No, because we need to get the sample that representative of the group that we are going to study. So how to select this? We can use random or non-random sample. And one more thing, that when we have to, take the sample, is we need to try to minimize bias. And when it comes to sampling, random samplings is usually is more favorable because of its ability to be generalized to a population as compared to non-random sample. We also no, not only types of research that we need to pay attention as well as sample, we also need to pay attention to research ethics, because sometimes in psychology we deal with what we call as um uh, se- uh those sensitive, or somehow people who are in a group that is very much sensitive to, for example, like people who were abused, or sexually abused people, or children who were abused. So, or somehow even in income, the B40. So not everyone somehow willing to expose their income, not only those who are in the lower tier income, also in the upper tier income. So income, money, those are very sensitive issues. And it requires us, to be able to be ethical in conducting our research, because our aims is to do not, impose harm to the participants. So how to get this? Currently we are lucky because now we can get consent from institutional review. If for IIM, you can apply for IRIT. So we can also, when conducting study, we have to provide them informed consent, confidentiality. We have to tell them how we maintain confidentiality as well as debriefing. So these are the things that that we have to consider when we want to study psychology. So next one is a very important one, as quite interesting one. We are going to look at the brain and behavior. In this sense, we are going to basically look at or try to understand how does our body influence our behavior. So this is somehow, um, the question that is, when we behave, what are the factors that influence our behavior? So parts of it is our body. So this body somehow very much we are focusing on the brain and nervous system. So when it comes to brain and nervous system, it guides our interaction with the world, how we move our body and directing our body to adapt to the environment. So when we discuss about nervous system, there are two parts. One is central nervous system, which, this one is central nervous system, brain and the spinal cord. The blue one is what we call as peripheral nervous system. So peripheral nervous system is the network of nerves that connects the brain and spinal cord or to other parts of the body. So when we discuss peripheral nervous system, it also somehow divided into two. One is somatic nervous system. So this one is to convey information from the skin and muscle to the central nervous system. So this is somehow can explain reflex action. And the next one is autonomic nervous system. So autonomic nervous system can also be divided into two. We call it sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system. So sympathetic nervous system is system that activated during fight and flight situation. So if you look at this jiffy, so when they saw a ghost, so they're afraid. So what is the correct response? So run away from the jiffy. So these are basically when he wants to run, so he activates the sympathetic nervous system. So after running and he feels safe, so that is where parasympathetic nervous system activated, trying to calm the body down. So not only we have to understand the central nervous system as well as peripheral nervous system, we need to also understand the brain. So parts of it is what we call as the lobes. So we have frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe, cerebral, main brainstem as well as temporal lobe. So basically understanding parts of the brain is very much important because understanding this will be used to understand the next topic, which is sensation and perception as well as consciousness. So for example, occipital lobe here is responsible for sight and visual reception as well as interpretation. So not only by understanding the functions of the brain, we can understand, how we adapt to information. We can also understand disorders related to the dysfunction or somehow, when something wrong is this in this region, what will happen to them. So basically disorders related to, related to the abnormality in this particular region. So for example, if one is diagnosed with degenerative cerebellum, so what will affect their behavior? So this person may struggle with balance and coordination. So not only the parts of the brain that we need to understand, we need to also understand the nerves as well as what is going on inside the nerves, which is, the transmission of the what we call here is I'm sorry, neurotransmitter. So each neurotransmitter has its own function, which is very much influencing our behavior. We take GABA, for example. GABA is a neurotransmitter important in the brain because it keeps somehow many neurons from firing. So this is the functions of GABA. So if a person have low level of GABA, they are linked with anxiety. So this is how, not only that, we can also understand somehow the adrenaline, dopamine, pleasure basically. And this dopamine, the feeling of pleasure, can somehow very much related to movement and motivation. And as I told you before, understanding brain as well as the body parts, the nervous system is very much related to the many other topics of psychology. Now we are going to move to the next topic, which is sensation and perception. But before that, so hopefully you can share in the chat So what can you see from this figure? Uh, Can you see like the two circles moving, or you just see, different kinds of colors? So somehow when we see, this is pictures that is not inanimate picture, but sometimes we can see movement from the pictures. So this is very much related to the next topic, which what we call as sensation and perception. So when we see something, that is the process what we call as sensation. Sensation is basically we receive stimulus from environment, transform those energies to neuronal energies. So this is somehow, the first process of how we understand the world and how we react to the world. Sensation. So here, transform energies to neuronal energies in the sense that, we have to understand that there are different kind of energies here. For example, light is one energy. Sound is another energy. I'm not talking about aura. This is the physical energy. So, and this energy can be detected from different organ because each organ, they have their own specialized neurons. For example, eyes. Eyes have the neurons that can capture lights. This is why we can, somehow, before we can see, somehow, uh, the process that making sense of the sense is what we call as perception. So basically, sensation is we get the information from the environment, then we transform to neuronal energies. These energies is sent to the nervous system, and they are going to interpret it. So these are the perception. So we try to make sense of what we sense. So, and when it and this somehow perception is what makes us, to see this picture moving. This is how we perceive things. And what interests me, and what more fascinated is, when we talk about perception, the first one who can come to correct conclusion was Ibn al-Haytham. Ibn al-Haytham said, we don't see with our eyes. In the sense that we can see, it is weird. But why we can see is that the process basically happens in the brain. The interpretations that we see is basically based on the brain. So again, this is very much related to here, occipital lobe. So we may, collect the information from the environment, but the one that how we interpret the information happens in the central nervous system. These are the making sense of the sense. So, so when it comes to the rotational illusion, the two rings appear rotates different direction. This is what also we call as, illusion, perceptual illusion. And this illusion is basically adaptive. Why do we see that picture moving? One of it is because of our focus and peripheral vision, in the sense that this illusion also plays on how we direct our attention. When we focus on the ring, and then the motion perceived in another ring can shift based on our awareness. So now we comes to consciousness. So when it comes to consciousness, our awareness, it is limited. So that's why multitask is basically impossible, because our awareness is very limited. So we focus on one, the other part is not our main focus. And then when we try to shift our focus, the other part is not our focus. That's why we look at it as moving. So here, when it comes to consciousness, Consciousness refers to individual awareness of external events and internal sensation under a certain condition of arousal. And I would like to highlight again why this consciousness is very important, because again, it is very much related to the brain. So see here, Jiffy. So we might say that, oh, this person is drunk. Why he is drunk? Because he's taking so-called psychoactive drugs. This can include alcohol. So when you take drugs or alcohol, it alters the nervous system, alters the consciousness. It modifies perceptions as well as changes the mood. So basically, after once drinking, or smoking or taking drugs, it somehow um altered what is going on in the brain. So when a person is drunk, vision is blurred, speech is impaired, sensation and perceptions are diminished, inhibitions, judgment and intellectual functions are also impaired. So, this is somehow how does our body, and not only that, when it comes to this phenomena, our behavior, the actions of taking psychoactive drugs influence the body and therefore again influence the later behavior. So now I have 15 minutes more. So memory is another topic. So when it comes to memory, we discuss the three memories, process of memories. The first is encoding, storing, as well as retrieving. And we also talk about forgetfulness, why we forget. So in the sense of why we forget, sometimes it is due to what we call as encoding failure. So why we do encoding is basically we get information and store it. So encoding failure is basically you don't have the information at all. Let's say, for example, one person that, hey, I think I have bought, a pen before. Where is the pen? But basically, there is no pen because she or he basically don't buy the pen. So this is how encoding failure happen. Basically, you don't remember because there is no information to remember. You fail to encode it. We have also storage as well as retrieval. And the next one is learning. So people do associate memory and learning in the sense that, let's say, for example, following this lecture, you might feel that I need to memorize what I have, attend or what I have learned today. But when it comes to learning in psychology, learning is different. It's because learning is not only changes on what you know, what you don't know to what you know. Learning in psychology is basically permanent change in behavior. So basically, if you learn something but your behavior don't change, that means you perhaps not learn anything. But here, this is, again, this somehow, definition is very much related to, again, John B. Watson, the behaviorist, because, when it comes to learning, there must be differences or changes in behavior. So we call it, this first approach is classical conditioning. So, learning can happen by association in the sense that, before, this is somehow Ivan Pavlov's experiments, the conditioned stimulus pair with unconditioned stimulus. The conditioned stimulus pair with neutral stimulus. After pairing many times, the dogs, without having to see the food, but only by hearing the bell, later on the dogs can salivate. So basically, it's like, school children, initially, when first time coming to school, they don't know what does it mean by bell ringing. But after a few times bell ringing, teacher said, go to rest. So they, ultimately they know, oh, bell ringing, this is recess time. It's pair. But when it comes to learning, we also learn through observation. So we don't have to, we don't have to experience it on our own. We learn through other people's experience by also, somehow imitating or observing. But more importantly, when it comes to learning, what makes or what push people to change their behavior? It's the reward and punishment. And this reward is and punishment is very much also related to motivation later on. Let's say, for example, why do people want to study hard? Because of the reward that they can get. It can be, intrinsic in the sense that they feel motivated, they feel good, as well as extrinsic motivator. For example, like scholarship. If they work hard, they can get reward from that. Same goes to, let's say, for example, uh in work. So if they were, appropriately reward, they will repeat the pleasant behavior. But if the behavior punish, they will learn that I need to stop this behavior. So this is also parts of learning, rewards and punishment. But when it comes to reward and punishment, we learn by our experiences. In the sense that we have to be rewarded. We are the one who experience the reward, and we are the one who's experience the punishment. Then we will alter our behavior, whether to continue with the behavior or whether to stop with the behavior. But observational learning is different because we don't have to experience. We just have to see people. Let's say, for example, you have a mentor um at your workplace, and you observe this mentor. So you observe him. So this is how he did his work, or this is how she did her work. So you observe whether the way she do or the way he do her work will be rewarded or punished. So from their experiences, you know that this is how I should do. If I do this, looking at he or she was rewarded, I should do this kind of behavior. Same goes to certain kind of training. Let's say, for example, a person's wanted to learn how to drive. Learning how to drive, you cannot only take theories. You have to observe how the teachers drive first, or observe how the people's drive, and then you try yourself. So by observing, you know, we can also learn. You know, we also, our behavior can also somehow be motivated. So here, because of our goal. So if our goal, let's say for example today, I wanted to know about psychology. That's why you come to the class, because you have the goal to get or to complete today. We also somehow, when it comes to learning, we have a sudden insight. So what we call the aha moment. Insight learning, the sudden insight into our understanding of a problems to solution. This can be somehow, learning. But they can also be our motivation, particularly the reward and punishment one. So why do we do what we do? Sometimes because of the reward. We want to get the reward and we want to avoid the punishment. So that is based on the external factors. We also do what we do. Motivation is the force that moves people to behave, think, and do what they do, and is energized and directed and sustained. So parts of it is not only based on the external factors, but also the internal one. So here, when it comes to motivation, first is we want to somehow, fulfill the physiological need. This is based on Maslow's hierarchical needs. And then we want to maintain our safety. And then when this is completed, we would like to have this friendship, family, and then we want to get, be acknowledged, self-esteem. And last but not least, we want to self-actualize. So this somehow that motivates us what we want to do. Somehow motivates us do what we do. And somehow this is no longer, based on the environmental factors, but we want to get the internal one. And how does this motivation somehow related to emotion? Now, because all of us want the pursuit of happiness. Happiness is basically emotions. So the approach of motivation by asking goals and values can somehow, motivates us to do what we do. So at the end of the day, the pursuit goals is happiness. So this is how motivation can somehow relate it to emotion. So the next aspect that we are going to look at is human development. So, it is somehow impressing that in Quran, Quran said about, the development of infancy from conception, before born. So that is the physiological aspect. We also have cognitive aspect of development. And we should also know this, especially among policymakers in education, because we need to, somehow make sure that whatever subjects, the syllabus that we prepared must be tally with their cognitive development. Let's say, for example, if you give, people in concrete operational stage, just like young children, but the syllabus somehow is very much here, there will be a mismatch between the two. So not only that, we also have what we call as the psychosocial, development. So if this look at the cognitive aspect, this look at how the person in relation to their social somehow interact with the world and develop. So we have several parts. We have, this is from Eric Erickson, trust versus mistrust. We have autonomy versus shame and guilt and doubt. We also have hold on. In initiative versus guilt. We have involving industry versus competence. And more importantly here, this is what, the generations, the thing that we somehow very much pay attention about, the identity versus identity confusion. We have intimacy versus isolation, and generativity versus stagnation, as well as integrity versus despair. So this is how, if we are not going to look at only, the physical aspects, that the changes that happen throughout our life in terms of our physical and cognitive, but also how our relationship with the environment, with the socials, can also shapes our development. So on the next part is personality. So personality is basically our characters. How do we describe ourselves? So how do people know this is us? So personality have many theories and perspective, but the best one is the trait perspective. There was a personality called ocean. So ocean is refers to openness, conscientiousness, extraversion, agreeableness, as well as neuroticism. And these are somehow that explains how do we, our characters. And this is also important. This is one also important point before we go to the last one. Um, when it comes to personality, why it is important to know a person's character? One is it helps us to know ourselves more. The secondly is because of its utility. Utility is means usefulness. So in IO psychology, if we want to choose, person job fit, in the sense that who is the best candidate that suits for this position. So not only we want to know their intellectual capability, not only we want to know their physical capability, we want to make sure that this job somehow fit their characters, because we want to maximize and optimize their potential. We want to optimize, their performance. So this somehow utility, these are the usefulness of understanding person's personality and knowing yourself. For example, neuroticism is somehow the traits that somehow have a relationship with the negative aspects of self. So by knowing that we have this, as let's say for example, we know that we have high in neuroticism, that helps us on how to not to change our character, but how to makes our life much more, happier in the sense we even with having this kind of personality. And I think this is the one that is everyone familiar to, psychological disorder. So psychological disorders is basically, we talk about abnormal behavior here. Behavior that is not normal. So they have three characters: deviant, maladaptive, as well as personally distressful. So deviant here, atypical, unusual, statistically unusual. Maladaptive is somehow, inability to function and stressful. And these are the aspects or the approach that we use in order to understand psychological disorder. So these are the type of psychological disorder. We have neurodevelopmental, we have anxiety and anxiety related, we have mood disorder, schizophrenia, as well as personality disorder. I think many of us somehow, knows mood disorder as well as anxiety and anxiety related disorder, but less familiar with personality disorder. Interestingly, in psychology, we have antisocial personality disorder, but the antisocial personality disorder is different from what we describe. Oh, this person is antisocial. Antisocial personality disorder is not the person does not have social relationship or feeling shy to socialize with people. Antisocial personality disorder is basically the traits that most of the crime or criminals have. It characterized by guiltlessness, law breaking, exploitation of others, irresponsibility, and deceit. These kind of people they don't have remorse when they kill people. They don't have remorse if they break the law, etc. So these are basically disorder. And when it comes, these are the last part, when it comes to psychiatrists as well as clinical psychology. So people do have, somehow it is hard to differentiate between what is clinical psychologist and psychiatrist. So these are the differences. Basically, one in terms of, the what we call the degrees that they have. Psychiatrist is basically a medical degree. Clinical psychology in psychology. And then the core business. So when it comes to clinical psychology, we have assessment. Meaning to diagnose this one, most of the time it was the role of clinical psychologist. And as well as treatment of mental disorder. Psychological assessment, diagnosis, therapy, these are the core business of clinical psychology. So medical also does diagnosis and treatment, but most of the time deal with medical prescription. Psychologists don't give prescription. So we also have, but we do give psychotherapy. So psychotherapy as well as intervention to the people who experience or who diagnose with psychological disorder. That is the main parts of clinical psychology, the main business of clinical psychologists. Both must be licensed, but this one is licensed psychology. This one is licensed medical doctor. And more importantly, clinical psychologists, they look at the psychological factors and processes. You remember the 7 approaches that we discussed? So we look at that. And in clinical psychology, most of the time they use this what we call as biopsychosocial approach. And psychiatrists usually most of the time they look at the biological and medical factors. I think that is all from me because I thought that we can, if we have some more time, I would like to discuss this, but I think I don't have, I have already exceeded 2 minutes, right?
Alhamdulillah.